From Chattanooga, Tennessee, it's time for the Gospel Mailbox with Donnie Bryson. If you would like to contact the ministry, you may call Donnie at 423-355-3859. Write Donnie at P.O. Box 2446, Chattanooga, Tennessee 37409. Or email him at this email address, preacher@gospelmailbox.org. And now for today's lesson, here's Donnie Bryson.
Welcome to another edition of our virtual Sunday school class. Today's lesson is entitled Standing Firm Against Opposition. And it's lesson number 4 in the fall quarter. The lesson is taken from the 7th chapter of Acts, which is the sermon of Stephen right before he was martyred. We're going to skip around a little bit in the 7th chapter and point out some important parts of his sermon. Starting Acts 7, 2 through 4. And he said, "Men, brethren, and fathers, hearken. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Charan. And he said unto him, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shew thee. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans, and dwelt in Charan. And from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into this land wherein ye now dwell." And then jumping up to the 8th verse through the 10th verse, "And he gave him the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham begot Isaac, and circumcised him the 8th day. And Isaac begot Jacob. And Jacob begot the 12 patriarchs. And the patriarchs, moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt. But God was with him, and delivered him out of all of his afflictions, and gave him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he made him governor over Egypt and all his house." Then jumping down to the 17th verse, "And when the time of the promise drew nigh, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt." Then jumping down to the 33rd verse, "Then said the Lord to him, Put off thy shoes from thy feet, for the place wherein thou standest is holy ground. I have seen the affliction of my people which is in Egypt, and I have heard their groanings, and am came down to deliver them. And now come, and I will send thee into Egypt." And then jumping down to the 45th verse, "Which also our fathers that came after brought in with Jesus unto the possession of the Gentiles, whom God drave out before the face of our fathers, into the days of David, who found favor before God and desired to build a tabernacle for the God of Jacob. But Solomon built him a house." And then jumping down to the 52nd verse, "Which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted? And they have slain them which shewed before the coming of the just one, of whom you have been now the betrayers and murderers, who have received the law by the dispensation of angels and have not kept it. Now, we did skip around a lot in this chapter, but we want to come up and get our bearings of where we are in this story, what has happened before then to get us to this point, to where Stephen is preaching or giving what's called an apology, which is really a defense of himself before the Sanhedrin court. And what had happened, Stephen had been one of the folks that had been preaching quite vigorously during this time frame, and had been stirring up trouble and strife by preaching the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. And the Sanhedrin had gotten jealous of him and were worried about what all he was going to do. And we see in the chapter before this, in the 6th chapter, the 9th verse, then there arose certain of the synagogue, which are called the synagogue of the Libertines, and Cyrenians, and Alexandrians, and of them of Cilicia and Asia, disputing with Stephen. And these Libertines, we know from natural history, were actually freed slaves, so they had been persecuted. And you would think that they would be a little more tender-hearted than what they displayed here. But they were freed slaves and had lived a hard life and had somehow or another come by their freedom. And that's the group that was calling Stephen, or that was rising up and accusing Stephen to the Sanhedrin council. And the charge that they laid against Stephen was that he spoke blasphemous words against Moses and God, and that he spoke against the temple and the law. That was basically, in a nutshell, the charges that they were laying on Stephen. And this is Stephen's defense that he gave in this 7th chapter of the book of Acts. And as we know, the verses wasn't in the lesson today, but we know that Stephen became the first martyr, because even though he gave a fantastic apology, a fantastic defense of the faith, that they still killed him. That's what the end result of these charges that were laid at Stephen in the 7th chapter of Acts. But going back to our section of scriptures, going back starting at the 2nd verse, and he said, "Men, brethren, and fathers, hearken. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelled in Charan, and said unto him, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall shew thee." And want you to notice how that Stephen starts his defense off by being nice to the people. He's calling into account, or calling into mind, how that they are brothers. And they were hoping for the same promises. They were observing the same law. They were worshiping the same God. So he looks for those common ground that they have. And we need to take that into account and to put that into mind when we go to witness to people. You don't want to be any more offensive than you have to be. Now, you do have to stand against sin, and I'm not saying don't stand against sin. What I'm saying is that don't start off your witnessing by telling somebody how, calling them fatty or ugly or stupid. Start your witnessing off, being nice to them is, being nice to them. Look for common ground. When you're trying to witness to people and that kind of thing, if you went to the same school, if your parents worked at the same plant, point that out. If you all went to the same school, or if you are supporting the same football team, anything that you can think of to identify with this person, do that. And we see how Stephen, that's exactly what Stephen did. By calling them brothers, he was pointing out how that they shared this common law. They shared common heritage. They shared the same promises. And they shared these things. And that's what Stephen starts his defense out with, by pointing that out, the common the things they had in common. And also, too, I want to point out how that God, when he was sending Abraham out, he was sending him to a place he had not seen before. We see in the writer of Hebrews points that same thing out. Hebrews 11:8. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed and went out, not knowing whither he went. And back in those days, in those thousands and thousands of years ago, when Abraham, the time of Abraham when he got up and he left his homeland, those were not the days of Google Maps. Those were not the days of any type of maps. Those were not the days of worldwide television newscast. Abraham had absolutely no idea what this land looked like. He had no idea of the kind of people that were there, the crops that were there, the kind of farm animals that were there. He knew nothing of that. All he knew was that God appeared to him and said, "Come and follow me." And that's exactly what Abraham did. Okay, then going down to the 4th verse. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Charan. And from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him unto this land wherein ye now dwell. Now, Dr. Gill, some years ago, with this and dwelled in Charan, he notes that according to Jewish writers, this was for a period of about 5 years. And also that phrase, when his father was dead, he removed unto this land. And so we see that that Abraham waited for his father to die, and was supportive of his father, and then left. Okay, going down to Acts, the 7th chapter, starting at the 8th verse. And he gave him in the covenant of circumcision, And so Abraham begot Isaac and circumcised him the 8th day. And Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot the 12 patriarchs. And the patriarchs, moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him. And I want to stop and note this phrase, the covenant of circumcision. And what this really is what this phrase means, this is the covenant which circumcision was a token of the covenant. Now, this is why to this day all Jewish men are circumcised. It is a token, it is the symbol of this covenant that they have made with God Almighty. And also, too, I want to point out how that the patriarchs, that was Joseph's brothers, they were moved with envy and sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him. And I want to just talk just a few minutes because this is something that, and step a little bit out of the lesson, this is something that churches and ministries encounter all the time, and that is this envy that occurs. And it may be that one Sunday school teacher is envious of another Sunday school teacher. They envy their class. They may envy how supportive that class is. They may envy the honor that the church gives this one teacher that maybe they don't give another. You can be a youth leader and be envious of the person who got the job after you or the person who had the job before you. Then maybe you're envious of how well the young people supported the program under this other person, and you're envious of them. It may be that you wanted that job and this person got that job, and you're envious of them for having that job. It may be that you're envious of their skill in music and how well they sing. It may be that every time you hear them sing, you're reminded of the fact that they sing better than you are, and you're envious and jealous of them. Well, let me tell you something. Envy and jealousy is of the devil. It is not going to get you a blessing. The more envious and jealous you are, the more miserable you're going to be, and the more you're going to resist the work of God. If you're not the pastor, you're not the pastor. Don't be envious or jealous because this guy's the pastor. If you're not the state overseer, don't be envious and jealous of the guy who is the state overseer. You can be envious and jealous and want that job all you want, or every day to all hours of the night, and it isn't going to get you that job. If anything, it's going to keep you from getting that job because you're going to have sin in your life. It's going to hinder your ministry. If you've got 50 members in your church and the guy you went to Bible school with has got 500 members in his church, you being jealous of your buddy every minute of the waking hours is not going to get you one more member. You're still going to end up with 50 members, and if you get so ill and bitter, you're liable to end up losing the 50 you got. Envy and jealousy is of the devil. Nothing good ever comes out of being envious and jealous. Nothing good ever comes out of it. James, the 3rd chapter, 13 through 16. Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him shew out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom. But if ye have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not, and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. Let go. If things don't work out exactly like you thought they should, let go. Turn it over to God. Let Him be in control. Don't worry about it. I'm telling you, with everything in me, and the truth of God, I am proclaiming to you in the most clear and direct way I know how, that if you have envying and jealousy in your heart, in your ministry, you're not going to do any good. You will not be anointed like that because it's of the devil. You got to seek the face of God. Okay, going down to the 10th verse. And delivered him out of his afflictions. That's God delivered him out of his afflictions. And gave him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he made him governor over Egypt and all his house. We all know the story of Joseph, how that God, he got sold into bondage. He went down, the Midianites drug him down to Egypt, and he got raw deal after raw deal. And God saw him through it, turned everything around, and God was his salvation. And if you look at the attitude of Joseph as he went through all that stuff, you see no pride, you see no envying, you see no jealousy, you see no harboring ill toward his brothers. Even after they sold him into slavery, he was not holding a grudge. And that's why God blessed him. That's why God could use him, because he had that meek and humble spirit. And he did not hold grudges, and he did not have envy and strife in his heart. Psalms 37, 39 through 40. But the salvation of the righteous is of the Lord. He is their strength in the time of trouble. And the Lord shall help them and deliver them. He shall deliver them from the wicked and save them because they trust in Him. Now, I want to just make a historical note about how it says, and he made him governor over Egypt. Of course, we all know that the Pharaoh was still the number one ruler in Egypt. Joseph was an under-ruler, or a subordinate to Pharaoh, but he was the second in command. Then going down to the 17th verse, and when the time of the promise drew nigh, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. And we know that these people, as they went down, even though things were done to try to curtail their growth, how that the Jewish people, how they grew in Egypt, down to the point where there were about 600,000 of them in Egypt, and there were 3,550 men that were down there. But anyway, there were 600,000, give or take some men in Egypt. I can get this right. I'll get this right in a second here. There were over 600,000 men in Egypt. That did not include the old folks and the children. So they had grown to be a very, very large group of people down there. And the Egyptians were afraid of them. That's why they persecuted them so much. Okay, going down to Acts 33 through 34. Then said the Lord, put off thy shoes from thy feet. Now stop. Let me stop for a second. This is talking about when Moses was being called. Then said the Lord to him, put off thy shoes from thy feet, for the place where thou standest is holy ground. I have seen the afflictions of my people, which is in Egypt, and I have heard their groanings, and have come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send thee to Egypt. And I want to note about that, putting his shoes off. There are two things about that. First off, that's not the only time that God told people to do that. It was when they were standing on holy ground, and it's just like we have somebody take your shoes off when they come in to keep from tracking mud and dirt. That's one aspect to it. There's also another aspect to it where taking your shoes off is a surrendering. If you think back how that the near kinsman laws were, where they would take the shoe off when they were surrendering their right to redeem a piece of property. And then down to Acts 7:45 through 47, which also our fathers that came after brought in with Jesus unto the possession of the Gentiles, whom God drave out before the face of our fathers unto the days of David, who found favor before God and desired to find a tabernacle for the God of Jacob. But Solomon built an house. And then I want to point out that Jesus that's being talked of there is actually Joshua. And Joshua and Jesus is actually the same name, depends on what language it's being spoken in. And so that's talking about Joshua, how that they made the tabernacle and that kind of thing. Okay, going down to Acts, the 52nd verse. Which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted? And they have slain them which showed before the coming of the just one, of whom ye have been now the betrayers and murderers, who have received the law by the dispensation of angels, and have not kept it. So we see how that Stephen is winding this down and points out how that the Jewish people had killed these Jewish prophets repeatedly and had persecuted them. So that's pretty much how Stephen ends up his defense, and we know that they turned around and stoned him. And Stephen was our first martyr in the Christian church. And it may come down to the time when we have to do the same thing. So remember this story of Stephen, and remember his defense.
You have been listening to the Gospel Mailbox with Donnie Bryson. If you would like to contact the ministry, you may call Donnie at 423-355-3859. Write Donnie at P.O. Box 2446, Chattanooga, Tennessee 37409. Or email him at this email address, preacher@thegospelmailbox.org.